putting a lie detector thing up here every time I bullshit. It goes out and goes,
It's already going, man.
It's already gone. Like, why is it flashing like that? I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony.
Hi, Tony.
That's an excellent prayer. The set-aside prayer. By the end of the meeting, you'll be glad you heard it. Like it was said earlier, I'm part of the Big Book Study Workshop in Vancouver. If you're over there Friday nights at 7, we're there from 7 to 8. We do a Big Book Study Workshop, and it's pretty awesome. We get about anywhere from 70 to 100 people. And then Tuesday nights, we're not in directory. We do from 4 to 12. So Friday nights, we do steps 1, 2, and 3 through the book. Then once they make a decision, they go into the Tuesday night meeting. We start over again. And there's been enough people where they're starting to help other people. We get all the treatment centers and all that other stuff. Pretty remarkable stuff happening out there. I love this book. I mean, I've been studying it now a little over 28 years. And I get a new book about every 3 years. It falls apart, right? It's not that I'm learning new information. I just keep on enhancing the information I have. This thing is remarkably put together. It's like the Da Vinci's Code. If you really kind of know what's in here, it's really remarkable, right? It's like when they talk about the keys of the kingdom or the entrance fee to the fourth dimension. This is it. And when you kind of get a taste what's available to this thing, it's pretty wild, man. I'll kind of talk about that stuff a little later, but it's really mind-blowing. So I understand I go till about 11:30, right? Just a guy in the back says, I got the keys, we're over at 9. So it's kind of like that, right? I do really good for a guy in my mental condition. I really am. My sobriety date is April 8, 1989. It's not my first introduction to AA, but it was my first introduction to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And somebody found me dying of alcoholism in AA, of all places to be dying of alcoholism, introduced me to the basic text, which I understand is our program. And they took me through this, and I've been sober ever since. So my experience is I've never met anybody who's ever done this, who's maintained it, who's ever relapsed, including myself in the last 28 years, and including the people that took me through this. So it's kind of funny. My previous experience in the fellowship of AA, thinking I was in the program, was I spent 11 years in and out of the fellowship thinking I was doing the program, totally self-reliant based recovery, which I'll kind of get into that later, with the understanding I should be able to stay sober based on my own experience. And you hear that all the time. People say I should be able to stay sober based on my own experience. And if you're not the alcoholic of this type, then yes, you should be able to stay sober on your own experience, right? And enjoy the dating in AA. But I mean, other than that, it's kind of, what do you come here? I was lonely. You come here looking for a partner? Oh, you're in trouble. Okay, anyway, you deserve everything you get, right? It's going to be one of those meetings. By the end of it, you're going to really like what you got here when I leave. It's like, holy shit, he's gone back to BC. Oh yeah, good. Anyways, one of the things that it was already read here about the experience of the first 100 men and women. This is a basic text, but when you kind of go to the doctor's opinion, anybody got their book? It's XXV, where he starts talking about people who witnessed the movement that was happening in AA, and it's pretty remarkable when you kind of miss that if you're kind of just looking for you in this. A lot of people say, "Here, read this and look for you." Well, your view of you and our view of you is two different people, right? You ever go tell people, "Hey, I'm in AA," and nobody acts surprised? My nephew calls me from Detox. He says, "I think I'm an alcoholic." I said, "Oh, you're finding out what everybody already knew, right?" Anyways, isn't that the story? Everybody's more concerned about our drinking than we are. When we become concerned about it, then it's a problem, but it's usually years after. So they talk, this guy here, the doctor's opinion, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have experienced the suffering of men and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a national prominent hospital specializing in alcohol and drug addiction gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. So it's a pretty wild statement when you kind of think about it. Here's a guy who not only deals in alcoholism, but he's the chief physician in a treatment facility. And he's witnessed this thing that's kind of started to happen in his facility with one of the members, Bill. So it kind of gives it a lot of credibility right there. He says, I've dealt with these kind of people for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden something seemed to happen here where it's able to recreate these people's lives that we've been trying to do with these types of people and seem to fail with these types of alcoholics. But this movement that seems to be happening seems to be pretty remarkable, and I've witnessed it. It gives it a lot of credibility when you kind of look at that, right? Especially if you're afflicted with alcoholism. Kind of like there is actually a solution here, and the solution I haven't found anywhere yet where it says just don't do it anymore. Oh, that was the Reagan campaign, wasn't it? Those buttons are long gone, and so is your sobriety date if you're using that, right? So anyways, so then he kind of starts going through this, and he kind of talks about, you hear a lot of people say, as we get into this is not, getting back to the design of this book is to educate. Right? It's not to form an opinion on what they're saying. So a lot of people, we get into these studies and we start reading a bit, and then we think it interprets saying, oh, we just read something we want you to teach you, but no, we hear it as, oh, you just read something, this is what I think you just read. And that's not what it's asking us to interpret what they're reading. Right? My sponsor taught me, he says, do I understand what he's saying? Right? Because that's the whole idea of this thing, is to get educated on alcoholism from somebody else's point of view. Because there's my point of view on things, right? It's not always correct. And would you ever notice that sometimes you're the only one that holds that point of view? Right? Your Honor? No, it wasn't me. Well, we don't see it that way, Tony. 3 months. Okay. So anyway, so as he goes through this, my sponsor at the end of this, we'd go through it. Like I said, I got 12 steps into this Big Book study workshop. And as we went through it, he would ask me, do I understand what they're saying? Not my interpretation of what, he didn't say, what do you think they're saying? He says, do you understand what they're saying? And so as we went through this, it kind of started making good sense, his view on alcoholism based on what he witnessed. And when he talked about this letter, and then he talked about, it did not satisfy us to be told we're maladjusted, full flight from reality, or downright mental defectives, right? But I had to understand alcoholism from his point of view. So when he started talking about the first symptom in alcoholism, it was news to me. As funny as it may sound, but the first time in 11 years somebody explained to me the first symptom in alcoholism. They used to talk about the steps on the wall, and they'd go, it's a we program, right? No, it was their program. I needed to incorporate their program into my life, not my program. My program was getting me loaded. My program is do whatever makes sense to you. I think they call that Burger King sobriety. You can have it your way, but it ain't going to be good, right? So it's kind of like that. That was my life. I kept on saying, why isn't this working? There should have been a small voice, because you're doing it your way, right? So we'll get into why that is later, right? So when they describe the allergy, the first symptom in alcoholism, what made them powerless, notice it didn't say over everything. We get a lot of infiltration of outside influence information. And the problem is, if you're not armed with facts about the actual information, some of that stuff actually makes sense. Right? So it's kind of like when people say, oh, the recovery program is in the first 164 pages. No, it's not. It doesn't say that anywhere. But somebody heard somebody say that, says, well, that sounds good. Then the new person goes to the next meeting and heard what that person said, shares the next meeting. They go, wow, that sounds good. They sound like, now there's two people misinformed. And so on. Pretty soon, it's a catchphrase saying in AA. Well, what's missing from the first 164 pages? Doctor's opinion, the forwards, right? The information about alcoholism. And anywhere, even in the beginning of the text, we have a hard time with reading and listening. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. There's some people thinking, right now I can tell by the way you're looking. I won't point you out, but you won't. I'll leave you alone. Don't interrupt that stuff. Okay. So we like to think, don't we? I think an hour of thinking, right? So anyways, moving on. So the doctor talks about that being a little maladjusted, and he also talked about these people who underwent this change, the message that they experienced had depth and weight. It went past their thinking. We call it the thinking in Vancouver, we call that the coho section. Right? When you're deep sea fishing, you got to get the bait past the coho section to get to the king salmon. Because the coho swim at the top, and they swim in pools, schools. So when you drop the bait in, they grab the bait, and then once you got that thought or that fish on the line, it's all consuming. You can't get to the good stuff. right? And so that seems to be a problem. We can never really get to the depth and weight, the good stuff, the stuff with real meaning or real meat or real stuff that will hold true, right? And that was my experience in the first 11 years. I'd get a lot of intellectual, emotional thinking it was spiritual. Like I'd get emotional shifts or eureka moments, and I'd mistaken that for a spiritual experience, and I'd run with that. I'd get a lot of catchphrase sobriety. Be surrendering, acceptance is the answer to all my problems. Anybody coming back, I'm coming back. So I had a back problem like for 11 years, right? I was trying to get everything back, and when I got it back, I was coming back, and I was like 11 years. One home group I was in, they had my dry date in pencil. The Queensway Saturday night. Anybody coming back, they just kind of, oh, there's Tony, still loaded. Anyhow, I can't have my beer here? Yeah, so it was one of those meetings. So we talked about the allergy. The first symptom in alcoholism what made these people powerless over alcohol. These people, I had to understand what they were talking about. That when they took a drink, they triggered this thing called the phenomenon of craving. Right? So they labeled the first symptom in alcoholism for me as the allergy. So I understood that terminology. So when I started talking about the first symptom in alcoholism, they talked about the allergy. And from there, they expand on different words like the phenomenon of craving, these allergic types. But the basic information was the first symptom in alcoholism, these allergic types. And then he went on to say there's something also psychologically wrong with these people. But they really didn't suspect so because the way they think is normal to them. Right? The way we think is normal to us. And we were talking about that over dinner. We don't really think there's anything wrong with our thinking because we talk to people like us. And we laugh. Oh, yeah. Right? And then you talk to a normal person, they go, it's a totally different look. My wife's a normie. She's talked to a couple of you people. She goes, can we leave now? I'm going, that was funny. She goes, no, you're not inviting them for dinner. Anyhow. So he talks about the second symptom in alcohol. It says these people are irritable, restless, and discontented, right? Not comfortable in their own skin. In other words, not comfortable being sober, right? And they needed to experience that magic that they experienced in that first drink, long gone. Yeah, anybody remember the magic in a drink? I remember that magic in a drink, right? The promises came true. When I took that drink, I intuitively knew how to handle situations that used to baffle me. I comprehended the word serenity and new peace. How many people know that the promises came true when you drank in early sobriety? Yeah, and so that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a way to be comfortable within my own skin, right? And to drink with impunity, right? And I thought, impunity? So I'd take what I was learning in here and then I'd put it against the acid against what I was hearing in the fellowship. And I thought impunity wasn't to drink without consequence. I said, isn't that weird? Because everybody talks about the consequences of alcoholism. That's what I thought alcoholism was the consequences. So if I could drink without consequence, then I wouldn't be an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic because of the consequences. And then I'd hear people say, I got 15 impaired charges. So try methamphetamine. No, it's just... so I had a solution for that. But the friends gave you bad advice, right? Like, you got to have really good friends in bars that teach you how to drive drunk. No, people, maybe you should take a cab. Your friends say, oh, no, keep your hands at the bottom of the wheel. Well, why would you that way when you're not off? You don't, at the top of the wheel, you go, yeah, your car goes that way. Bottom of the wheel, your just head moves and your car stays straight. Good information. So anybody who's going to relapse, you know how to drive now, right? So sorry. It's like, I don't know. But anyways, moving on, whole different talk. I do that every once in a while. I go, yeah. It's like, come back, squirrel. I'm back. So the doctor talks about these people keep on doing what they're doing in spite of the consequences associated with that. So, and then you hear that against the test in the fellowship. So people say, well, they give you the understanding that once you hit bottom, or once you had enough, or once you make up your mind, or once you surrender, once you have this condition, that you should be able to stay stopped. But this sounds totally different than what I'm hearing in the fellowship. That's kind of confusing because I was always waiting to hit my bottom or, to have total acceptance or surrender, look for that lottery sobriety, that eureka moment that got me moving in a different direction. But I had those moments. I had 11 years of those moments coming in and out. So I had 11 years of sufficient things that happened to me out there that got my attention that brought me in here. And nothing in here was sufficient enough to happen to keep me here. And so what happens when I got to the doctor's opinion, he explained alcoholism. I see that he talks about this keeps happening over and over and over again. What keeps happening over and over again? Me drinking in spite of everything that's happened to me, that I can't stay stopped, or people like this can't stay stopped based on their own experience. I thought, wow, this is different than I've heard from other people. This is kind of really conflicting information. Now, I don't know if I'm liking this step one, because this step one tells me, regardless how I feel, think, or my position on step one, I'm going to continue to drink. So you telling me step one is the 100% guarantee that I'm going to drink again, regardless of how I feel or my position on it? Yeah. Step one never changes. So I realize now, by the time I got to more about alcoholism, what I conceded to my innermost self, what I conceded was I was going to drink again, regardless. And today, over 28 years later, my step one is still the same. I'm going to drink again. But what saves me from that is the recipe that I apply to my life in this basic text that connects me with something greater than me, that gives me a daily reprieve from that fate. That's why I hear people going out after 30 years, 25 years. Why? You think it's a good idea all of a sudden? Because they become without defense against that first drink and the insanity returns. So that tells me that step one never changes. So that's interesting. So when the doctor turns around and says that the only thing that will save these people is an entire psychic change. Not hitting bottom, not acceptance, not surrender, not any of those things that we hear, which sounds nice, an entire psychic change that has to come as a result of a course of action for people like me. I've known people who've had a sudden spiritual experience. I've experienced those at different times in my life. Sufficient change in the way I feel and look at things to start me on a new path, but nothing ever, I didn't know how to maintain and keep it. And so what happens is the life would start happening. I didn't have a way of dealing with it internally, and the insanity would return because I didn't have that relationship that I needed to formulate to keep me sober. Right? I became the primary focus of my sobriety. And when I become the primary focus of my sobriety, I'm focusing on the problem. But if you listen to people, people say, I'm working on myself. That explains why you're looking the way you do. No, sorry. You ever see it? I'm working on myself. Stop it. Holy smoke. So the doctor talks about, and he goes on to say, there's a lot of different personalities in AA, but what we all have in common is that physical part. You hear people identify with that all the time. They take a drink, phenomenon of craving develops, and that makes good sense why I drank the way I did and did the things I did. And so I couldn't drink without consequence because of the amount I was drinking. So if I can't change the amount I'm going to drink, I'm going to do stupid stuff while that impaired. That's why they call it impaired, lack of judgment. That's what impaired means. Yes, you can't think straight. Drink less. I can't drink less. Why? Because I have an allergy. I get thirstier when I drink. But didn't you just puke? Yeah, got to get rid of the taste now. Oh my God, what a night last night. Where's the beer? Right? And people don't do that. Right? Anyways, this is your third day in a row. Oh my God, I'm running behind. Okay. So they talk about the symptoms of alcoholism, and the doctor says, okay, let me gives 2 case studies of people he witnessed who had the problem, who did this recipe, and who recreated their lives based on spiritual ideas. Then he says, let's expand that. So I used to hear this all the time. Read Bill's story and try to find yourself. The first time I read Bill's story, I didn't find myself. But when my sponsor took me through it, my sponsor said, now let's read Bill's story and see what alcoholism looks like in somebody's life. That's a totally different perspective. It's like going to a movie. If you start, imagine if I said, hey, I'm in an extra in this movie, and we're going to go watch this 2.5-hour movie, and we're going to look for me in it. You're going to miss the whole point of the movie because you're just looking for this one specific thing, you, which makes sense for us. Let's go find me in there, right? That self-centeredness. Anyways, that's moving on before it turns into a lynch mob. Okay. So when I looked at it from an outside point of view of somebody who was suffering from alcoholism, and I kind of went through this thing, I was like, holy moly, it was pretty interesting how this guy couldn't get sober. And he didn't really suffer from the obsession because he didn't want to drink at different times. What he suffered from was the insanity that the doctor talked about. The times that somebody pushed the drink his way, how many times did he think he had it going on? He was obsessed with fixing him. Right? How many times did he even convince people around him that he had this thing? Right? So somebody said earlier, I was talking to somebody who likes facts and stuff like that. Somebody wrote a book, And supposedly, Bill ended up in the treatment center, like in the hospital, like 13 times. It was like, holy smokes, but he went to treatment 3 times. So here's one of our founders went to treatment 3 times. So what was the difference the 3rd time compared to the first 2 times? Because if it was about surrendering and acceptance and willingness and hitting bottom, then he would have had this thing the 2nd time. Because as you went through his story, I think they start talking about it. You kind of got your book and you kind of go through this. It's kind of interesting where he starts talking about, you see how long he was trying to stay sober for. And he talks about here on page 8, and it starts on page 7, right? And he talks about, here he just finishes saying, and which we hear a lot in the fellowship of AA, right? That self-knowledge. Self-knowledge. Just don't take the first drink and I'll be okay, if you're not alcoholic. But if you're alcoholic, you won't be able to remember that. Right? And that's the cunning part of our illness, is that you'll be the only one that can't remember you're not supposed to be drinking when you're drinking. Oh, everybody around you will remember you're not supposed to be drinking. Anybody ever relapse here? I'm the only one? Okay, so anybody surprised you start drinking again? Not really, eh? I'm going to get sober. Oh, sure you are. Okay, anyways. So we see here in Bill's story, he talks about, he thinks self-knowledge was the answer after meeting with the doctor, and then he talked about the frightful day came where he drank again, right? Then he talked about being in the hospital here. I returned to the hospital, which is the treatment center. This is the 2nd time, right? This was the finish. The curtains, it seemed to me. My worried wife, and he kind of goes on here. They did not tell me that he was finished, and they kind of talked about, no words can, on page 8, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. You can see there, he has all the elements of acceptance. He just did step 1, I would think, pretty good. That's a really good step 1, right? If your alcohol is your master, then based on what you hear a lot in the fellowship, he should be able to stay sober now. He's hit bottom. He has acceptance. He's surrendered. He has full knowledge of his situation. He admitted he was powerless over alcohol. He's done step 1 100%. He should be able to stay sober based on that. So it should be a good story from here on out, right? But he said the frightful day came again where he drank again. The insidious insanity. Now he knew why he was drinking. So that means his story is going to continue to be the same. He's going to get to that desperate place of wanting to stop. He'll try to stay stopped based on his own experience, and then the insanity will turn, and this will keep on going until Ebby shows up in his life. You see, Ebby shows up in his life who has a solution for him that he didn't have beforehand. And Ebby's kind of, the first thing Bill noticed about Ebby was there's something different about his eyes. It was pretty remarkable. There was an example of this situation right there before him, right? So they sat down, Ebby explained the situation and the course of action that he took. And long story short, he's seen Ebby Ebby started to see Bill thinking. You know how you can tell when an alcoholic's thinking, eh? Get that glazed look, like they're the only one watching a movie? Okay, so, yeah, anyway, moving on. So he says, so Ebby's job was to navigate through Bill's thinking to keep him focused enough to keep him moving through this solution, right? He's seen what the type of thinking Bill was having. There was no way he was going to do this thing. So Ebby said, why don't you choose your own conception of this power? But you kind of notice it wasn't Bill's own understanding. You kind of work with me on this. Ebby was given an example of a course of action that he did, and it talked about this power that he incorporated, he got access to. And he says, based on this is my story, why don't you choose your own conception of what I'm talking about? Right? You hear a lot of people say, a doorknob or a light bulb. That's not what they're talking about. They say, God as we understood him. The book talks about how they understand this power. Right? And then you could formulate your own understanding of that, but this is how, you need to understand how we understand that power in order to formulate an idea or a beginning. So Bill kind of says, yeah, it was only a matter of being willing to build what I seen in my friend if I did what he did, and then his friend took it. So the difference in the 3rd time in treatment was he had Ebby taking him through a course of action. All the elements were the same. The difference was he had an experienced member right? I don't know if he was a member, but an experienced member of AA at the time before AA started, experienced member who had the solution through application, who experienced the change, who carried this message to Bill. Bill went through this. He experienced the same kind of thing within the hospital. And in the hospital, he starts seeing the change, the elements of the change that started happening. There's some earmarks for change that a lot of people seem to miss in the fellowship. They think it's an emotional thing that's happening. It's more deeper than that. The first thing that Bill underwent was a communication with something greater than himself. That was the first confirmation of change. He was no longer in counsel with himself. The page previous, he was in counsel with himself. You know, the Holy Trinity, unholy Trinity, one of my friends talk about, me, myself, and I. That's why we like the Serenity Prayer. There's two me's and an I in it. two I's and a me in it. Okay, so anyways, moving on. So we see he underwent this profound change while in the hospital, and then he thought how this might benefit others. That's pretty profound, considering a couple pages earlier he was only stuck on himself. We see a lot of us in the fellowship are really stuck on ourselves. That's why the fellowship recovery rate is dropping the way it is really because the message is changing within the fellowship. Because if the fellowship's message was the same as it was when they written this, then we wouldn't even be asking people to do the phone services. We wouldn't have to beg people to show up at meetings and all this setup and all this stuff or work with people. Like the numbers are really declining for people to be involved with other people because the recovery rate at the internal hasn't shifted, but that's a whole different thing. We'll get into that later. So we see that what Bill was like, what happened, what he's like now as a result of alcoholism, the course of action that he put into his life, and what his life looked like afterwards. So as we start going through this thing, I'm going to give you some really different perspectives on things that really change my view of all this, that really enhance my sobriety, because you guys probably go through this all the time. Right? So I'm going to give you a little different perspective. That way you got something to rebuttal and talk about all week, right? It's like, wow, I really like what that guy had to say. That guy's a little crazy. A little of both is true. All depends where you catch me on this. So when they talk about, as they go through here, now they're going to expand on the points that Ebby was talking about, Bill was talking about, and a doctor was talking about on. You hear people say, well, the first part of the book only talks about the problem. Then you're not reading the book. Because right from the beginning, you started talking about there's a problem, there's a solution, and there's a course of action. The doctor's opinion talked about the problem, the solution, and the course of action, and gave examples of that. Bill's story talked about the problem, the solution, and the course of action he took and gave an example of that. We're not even through Bill's story yet. Right? It's pretty. So if you're learning how to read the book, which is the sponsor's job, is to sponsor you through this. But the real people who sponsor you is the collective experience of the first 100 men and women. Because I'm trying to get what they got. My sponsor's job is to navigate me through this, to see that I clearly understand what they're talking about and the application of that. That's really what sponsorship's job is about. Not to change the information being presented. Not to give you a new way of doing things. You know this, everybody's got a new way of doing things. What happened to that new guy of a new way of doing things? Oh, we're doing his memorial next week. He had a really good way of doing things. Okay. Anyways. Then they talk about the solution, the big difference here between the fellowship and the program. And then they get into this one thing that was really kind of in that on page 18, they re-emphasize what this book is about. It's to comfort and inform those who may be afflicted by alcoholism. It's to inform me what the problem is as they see it, based on the doctor's findings, and the solution that they found based on Ebby's experience with those two people that came and visited him, and he passed on that experience to Bill, that there is a solution to the dilemma that may be killing them, but also to understand, comfort and inform those who may be afflicted by alcoholism. That means anybody who's reading this will understand what alcoholism is from their point of view. So that means I could be a normie reading this. That's why they ask you to give it to the employers, to the wives, and all these people so they can understand what they're dealing with alcoholics. Because the only one that really don't know what they're dealing with is the alcoholic. Right? When you go to, we're the only group of people that think we can stay sober by going to meetings. That's like saying, oh, where are you going? I'm going back to the airport. Where are you going? Nowhere, I'm just going to the airport. Why are you going there? Hope there's people going somewhere. And I get to hear where everybody's been. And boy, I've been to a lot of places, but you've just been to the airport. Yeah. When do you get a ticket? Oh, no. No. That's like an AA meeting, right? We all talk, if you want what we have, we're saying, hey, we've been places as a result of this ticket, this plan, right? We have a new agent. We have a new plan. We have a new design for living. We travel. We're doing things. People are saying, oh no, I just want to hear about your experience so I can share it at the next meeting. Okay. Okay, so I talked about that in 18. And then one of the things here, and then they start getting into 21, where they talk about, 20, where they talk about here the difference between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And then in 21, they start getting into what about the real alcoholic. And then 22, this is really cool at the bottom. They start talking about breaking up the allergy and the second symptom. So they've talked in great detail about the first symptom of alcoholism. Now they're going to start talking about the second symptom of alcohol, which is really missed in the fellowship of AA. This symptom is the least understood and the most talked about in this book. We miss it. We have a keen ability to miss the obvious. Anybody been to a meeting where they haven't read the preamble? Mm-hmm. They read it at every single meeting. How many people still refer to the fellowship as the program? It's an incorrect statement, right? It would go against our traditions if it was so, right? But that's a totally different topic. Okay, moving on. Every meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women. So here, they talk about, which is really interesting on page 22, they say, as long as I don't take that first drink, I won't trigger the allergy, the phenomenon of craving, thus wanting the next drink, thus wanting the next drink, thus all the consequences and the stuff that happens as a result of my inability to control the amounts I drink. So if I don't take that first drink, I won't trigger the allergy, ending up in trouble. Then on 22, they say, but that's not the problem. Right? We know you're allergic to alcohol, but that's not really the problem. It's like being allergic to peanuts and you keep eating peanuts. The point that you're allergic to peanuts becomes secondary. So when we talk to alcoholism, people go, I don't know what you mean. Well, I'm allergic to cashews. Pistachios. I found out a couple years ago. I had an allergic reaction. I had symptoms of it before, but I ignored it because I really like cracking and getting the red stuff. So I ignored the symptoms, right? I always thought, oh, it's funny. I always get a cold. My throat kind of closes up. But I like the effect produced by them. Just before the passing out part. But that's another story. Anyhow, moving on, Tony. Hurry up. So then I ate them and I had a severe reaction. I ended up in hospital. Right? I drove myself there. I got in trouble for that. They said, you drove yourself here? I said, yeah. Anyways, I said, I've driven a lot worse. But they didn't find that funny. So anyways, they hooked me up to IV and all that stuff. And the nurse explained to me my problem. How well do you think I listened to her? I watched her lips move. My ears focused on what she was saying. I was in emergency. I didn't hear a single thing. She didn't have to repeat herself. That I can't safely eat this stuff. I thanked her very much for that information. I went 3 months. And then I ended up in Belize. No, it was Montreal. Sorry, I ended up in Montreal and they were roasting them on the street and I thought, I've never had roasted pistachios. And it's been 3 months, and it was those other ones were from Brazil. These are from Africa. These really, and they don't have the red dye in it. Maybe it was the red dye, right? Because so I ate another bag. I ended up in hospital. They transferred my file over, and they said, "Didn't they inform you in BC that you were allergic to this stuff?" I said, "Yeah, but they said, okay, we're going to tell you again. You can't eat it. You got it? I got it." So I travel for a little while, I end up in Belize. They have the best pistachio ice cream, world renowned. I walk by, there's a sale. It's ice cream. 2 scoops for the price of 1. I thought, it's a hot day. I was hot. I said, why not? I'm in Belize, hot day. I ate 2 scoops, ended up in hospital. They got my file back. I got a long look. You get those long looks? Who do you think I talked to next? Psychiatrist. Right? So there's a couple of people going, you are nuts. It's not a true story. I had people walk up to me after, really, you did that 3 times? No, I didn't. Because when it comes to that stuff, there's a level of sanity. I don't need to find out if I'm allergic to it anymore. I don't care. It's not that important to me. My wife goes, well, maybe it's because of the amount you ate. I said, it doesn't care. Sure, after I sign the insurance papers, maybe try it. No. So I said, come on, try it again. See, it's not that important to me, even though I enjoyed them. A couple times I've walked by the supermarket and I went, oh, no, nah, because it's not that important to me. But with alcohol, there's something fundamentally different than me. My brain goes, hey, you ended up in the hospital last time. They had to strap you to bed. There was 2 psychiatrists that are going to commit you. I could rationalize that situation as being somebody else, or there's no thought whatsoever, and I'll take a drink, triggering the phenomenon of craving. This has happened over and over and over. So they talked about here, this is kind of interesting. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting a terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. I can understand that. Like, I don't have a problem with pistachios because I don't eat them no more, right? But not so with alcohol. So then they start talking about the mind. So if I never took a drink, then they talk about they're going to give me the first symptom in alcoholism, the second symptom in alcoholism down here, and they describe it as the malady. Once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. What malady? The sickness that centers in my mind. I have a sickness that centers in my mind, making it an illness. It's not an obsession. It's a sickness that centers in my mind. And they'll go to describe it later. They talk about this phenomena, right? A phenomena is an unexplainable event. They can't really explain it, but we'll give you pictures of what it looks like. This is what this phenomena looks like. It's unexplainable really why it happened, but this is what it looks like when it does happen. Right? So they talk about this malady that centers in my mind, and they'll go on to expand on what they mean by this sickness that's not, you ever hear people say, oh, my illness is in the parking lot? You guys got that saying here? We like to separate ourselves from the illness. Or we think the illness is the first drink, or we think if I stay away from the first drink, if I stay away from this condition, if I stay away from these triggers, if I stay away from this, if I stay away, as long as I have conditional sobriety, I'll be okay. If the conditions are right, I'll stay sober. What happened? The conditions weren't right. As long as the day doesn't end in a Y, I'll stay sober, right? So when they started to describe this thing, and then they talk about this obsession, right? And when I kind of studied this, I thought, isn't this interesting? And I've watched it all the way through my sobriety, and I've really kept an eye on it as points of different things that I kind of try to stay aware of, mostly in 11. But they talk about here is what our biggest problem is. They talk about once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday they'll beat the game. But they often suspect they're down for the count. Now, here's how the mind works. What do they mean by the obsession in this context? Do you hear what your brain's saying to yourself? Right? Most people think it's in regards to the first drink, that they think they can control and enjoy their drinking. That's not the contents that's using it, right? Because they said if I never took a first drink, I never have to worry about that. So they started a new conversation off of the second symptom of alcoholism was the malady, this sickness that centers in my mind. They describe it as a malady. And a part of the problem is that when I relapse, you listen to most people who relapse, they have their own solution on how they're going to fix themselves. We're obsessed with the idea of fixing ourselves, right? Most people who've relapsed, they tell you how we're going to get sober this time. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do more of what I was doing before I got loaded the last time. That makes sense to you? Yes. Didn't you get loaded the last time? But I got 3 months before. That's not a success story. If you had your pilot's license, you went 3 months without a crash. It's different. I got 3 months before, and you're writing a book. No, just it's not as. That means you weren't successful. Successful means I'm still sober. I've been sober for a period of time as a result of something other than me. If you're thinking you're keeping you sober, you're still obsessed with what they're talking about here, right? And they talk about the tragic truth is that if a man be a real alcoholic, the happy day will not arrive. What's that? Of staying sober. Happy day won't arrive. How many people, I look back on my story, I believed each time that this was it. The last time I drank was April 8, 1989. I stayed sober from my birthday. It was April 6. I just turned 27 years old. I ended up in BC in 85, 2 years trying to get sober. I just finished 360 meetings in 90 days. I got a 3-month ship. I'm in 4 12 and 12 studies. I'm running one. Right? I talked about how great I was doing. I talked about acceptance. I talked about surrendering. I talked about me and God. We were like this, and I winked at her over there. And I had all my ducks in an order, right? I had everything I needed that I thought to keep me happy. An hour after getting that chip, like I got Academy Award talking about how great of a job I'm doing working on me, I was drinking an hour later. That's when these guys got a hold of me. So they talk about, it's kind of like, so that's my obsession, that I'm always going to struggle with the idea of fixing myself. It's always going to be a dead heat race between spiritual matters and fixing myself. Spiritual matters and fixing myself. They reconfirm that in how it works by the three pertinent ideas. A, that we're alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, but I spend all day trying to manage it. B, that no human power could have relieved my alcoholism, had made me feel better, because alcohol is but a symptom. Right? My thinking makes me feel shit. My emotions reflect that. And I'm looking for a solution to fix me outside of me. Oh, there's something new. That's something new. Replace, rebuy, rebuild. It's got to be something that gives me the same effect as a drink. I look for that in people, places, and things. Make me feel better. When you stop making me feel better, that stops making me feel better. That becomes a problem. Time to replace it. I'm probably the only one, right? Yeah. Okay, so then they get into confirming what they're talking about here on page 24. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons, lost the power of choice in drink, right? I mean, when it comes about drinking, I've lost the ability to choose when I'm going to drink or not. That's kind of baffling, because 98% of the time I can say no to a drink. That's not the times they're talking about. They're talking about at certain times I won't be able to see the danger of what I'm about to do. How do I know if I have that symptom? Look back on my drinking history. They talked about that earlier. They talked about as we look back, right? They talk about, do I have the ability to stay sober based on my own experience? The answer is no for me. Right? How many times did I say I was going to quit? I was done forever. Made solid most promises, and I believe it. How many times did I end up getting drunk regardless? And how many times did we make excuses for our relapse? But the truth is, there is no real good reason for relapse. You're just going to do it. The book talks about that if we're alcoholic, we doubt you'll be able to stay sober. We give the people the impression that they can stay sober because they're in AA. Like they're exempt from alcoholism because you're sitting in a meeting. Like it's an alcohol-free zone. Oh, you're in here now, you're good. No, you're not. You're the same person that walked in here. Alcoholism is like being on the Titanic. Remember that story that they used? Most of us, we get in a room down below, we're happy to be on the boat. We got a small window, we're fantastic on it. Look, I'm on the Titanic, I'm going on holidays, this is unsinkable, life's fantastic. And then you hear a big kaboom. We go, the alcoholics go, it's not that bad. The other people go, what the hell? See all the people running in the hallways, oh, dramatics. Drama. Right? And then we don't get alarmed till we see the water. Oh my God, there's a problem. I got to get off the boat. I got to stop. Remember that first time? Serious call, I got to stop. We go up a couple floors, we see people relaxing. Hey, well, first AA meeting. Well, we sit down. We don't realize that most of these people are on a different vessel. We think they're on the same vessel. They got a solution for alcohol. I don't. I'm on the same vessel. I've just brought it to a meeting. I'm on a different floor than the Titanic. There's a bigger room. There's a balcony. Alcoholism is down there. I'm free from it now. I don't hear it. I don't hear it anymore. Let's get comfortable. Let's start getting comfortable. And all of a sudden, there are those little screaming people again. People in my life, right? You hear people say, I lost everything. No, you didn't. You watch it go. Right? Yeah? They'll be back. No, they won't. They're sitting there watching everything you do. And yeah, I'll get back to the time. I'm on one of those again, right? So like, we don't get nothing back. They get us back. Right? We got people waiting for us, kids, loved ones. They're still living their lives. They're getting robbed because we're afflicted with alcoholism. AA's job is to get us back right, to find a solution that we can renew ourselves with society, our jobs, our friends, loved ones, and be productive members of society, helping other people. We go back to them. They get us back. Right? It's just the way we look at things is really funny. So anyways, I'm on the Titanic, and all of a sudden the ship's getting a little leaning, the water's coming up. I'm getting a little more serious here. So now I have my first relapse. Right? Now I'm going up to, I go around, I'm getting more serious. I go up to the other floor. There's balconies. I sit down again. Life's fantastic. As long as I don't go down there, I'll be okay. I'll watch out for if the water comes. I got me conditioned sobriety again. I'm watching out for the conditions. I'm on the same vessel. But my brain don't say that because I look around me thinking, look, everything looks different, but I'm still on alcoholism. Right? But my view has changed because I'm a little delusional when it comes to being able to see me clearly. Obviously, how many people have been telling me I had a problem long before I thought I had a problem? I remember the first person that told me who I ever had a problem. I don't talk to them. My problem is you're telling me something I don't want to know about me. So obviously you become the problem. So then you can imagine, this is actually a true story. Then you get to the top of the ship. There's not a lot of lifeboats. So the captain orders the band to play on. The band's playing, the ship's sinking, they're playing, and there's waiters walking, can I help you? I say, actually, yes, make it a double. You sit down there, you're wondering why all these people are running for their lives and the table's going crooked. We just take a napkin because we're really resourceful. We put it under the table so it's straight so it doesn't upset our drink. Nothing's changed. I need to get on that lifeboat to abandon the ship. I'm on to move to a new vessel, a new way of life. Unless I get there, I'm under the same vessel. So my story was what I used to be like, what it was still like, what it continued to be like, but I was the only one unaware of it. Right? In AA. So they talk about, as they go through here, and it goes right into the segue of 34 of the baffling feature to leave it alone. That means just because you're here doesn't mean you're going to stay sober. We know you're going to get drunk if you don't find a solution. The likelihood of you staying sober on your own resources or your own experience, nowhere in here does it say that you'll be able to stay sober based on you if you're alcoholic. We know you'll be drinking after making that solemn oath. That's why we give those chips. They're not a reward system. They're a reminder you're dealing with alcoholism. The likelihood of you getting another chip is not in your favor. Pretty wild when you look at it that way, right? When we were talking over dinner, there's a fentanyl epidemic, whatever, you know what the hell I'm talking about. There's a problem, right? and then everybody's getting concerned now in meetings. And I said, well, so as AA members who have this solution, I said, we were talking about over dinner. When I was talking to this person, I said, the last time you seen that person in a meeting alive, and you were to relive that moment, would you have changed your talk? So just because you're sitting here doesn't mean you're going to be alive this time, next week or next year, next month. And so our job as AA members who have recovered, who have a solution, is to talk about the solution, our primary purpose, because there's one person's lives that may depend on this, right? You may be the difference between them finding a solution and them dying of alcoholism. If it was up to them to find a solution, then every one of us would be dead. Somebody carried the message to us and took the time to walk us through our thinking, to walk us through all this stuff to get us through this. Even when we're battling ourselves, they comfort us enough to keep us walking through this. That's what Abby did with Bill, right? All the way through this, that's the experience. So they talk about here, this is really wild. So they talk about alternatives, which is kind of really on page 25. When I talked to my sponsor about this, and it kind of gets into what the promises are talking about. It says, if you are serious alcoholics, we believe there's no middle-of-the-road solution. We're in a position where life is becoming impossible. If we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. The other was to accept spiritual help. So I asked my sponsor, so what's an alternative? He says it's not a choice. I said, what do you mean it's not a choice? He says an alternative it means as a result of something, right? So step one is not a result of me. I'm a result of step one. That's a totally different drive. If I'm a result of something, then I can't change that, right? And if it's a result of me, then I can change that. But there's something I can't change. I'm an alcoholic as a result of the illness that has me here, right? So an alternative, they talk about the promises that I start this course of action. And I get sober as a result of this course of action, not as a result of starting it. Alternative means I get it as a result of. So the promises talk about is suddenly realize that God is doing for you what we could not do for ourselves. Step 11 talks about this conscious contact. Step 12 talks about having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. The first time they talk about this change really happening is in step 10, as a result of alternative. So as a result of me doing this course of action, I get to experience recovery. Just because I make a decision to do this doesn't mean I'm doing it. I've made a decision to change my life many times, but I wasn't able to achieve it because of the alternative. I haven't developed anything sufficient enough to create a change in my life. Kind of made sense to me. So my sobriety is a result of the work that I do connected to something greater than myself. It's a result of, right? I don't know. I found that really interesting when I kind of went through it. I don't know if it kind of makes any difference. And then they talk about here on page 27 in regards to this solution. But again, they use the word phenomenon. They use it through our text a few times. One in regards to the physical part, and then once in regards to our thinking part, right? The illness, the malady, and they said this is what it looks like, the continuation of drinking, regardless of the consequence. And then they use the phenomenon in regards to the solution, right? The doctor says, he talks about these occurrences have been happening since the beginning of mankind. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. Right? And they talk about the psychic change that they talk about in the back of the book. But they said, this is what it kind of looks like, right? And we read the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. It says, this is what it looks like. This is what we're trying to get you to. Here's the roadmap to get you there. And when you experience it, you'll be able to say, yes, I'm experiencing these things based on what you told me. Not only do I understand it now, I'm experiencing it. Because until I experience it, I'm not going to stay here. This is something I need to experience for myself. Your experience will not be enough to keep me sober. It'll help get me sober. It won't be enough to keep me sober. I need to experience it for myself. So as we kind of go through here, I'm going to pick up speed on this. And they talk about here, at the end, to reconfirm what I was talking about on page 43, they reconfirm that the only thing that's going to stop me from my next relapse, because it's coming. Every single person will be in a place, if they're alcoholic, of that position, whether they take a drink or not. And the only thing that will stop them is their relationship with a power greater than them. And that's kind of how my sponsor told me. He talked about, once more, the alcoholic, not some alcoholics. They said the alcoholic. Which alcoholic? The alcoholic. Well, which one? The alcoholic. I like to argue. Anybody like to argue in here? Right? Once more, in case you missed this through the whole book so far, in case you missed this through the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, there is a solution, more about alcoholism. In case you missed it all the way, we're going to tell you one more time. You ever get that? I'm going to tell you one more time. Okay. Okay, honey, I got it. Okay. The alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. The alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against that first, except in a few rare cases. That means it's coming. But there's rare cases where something happens where they don't take that drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he or any other human being can provide such a... His defense must come from a higher power. That's pretty heavy when you think about that, right? And in my sobriety, I could say there's been 3 times where that's happened to me. Something greater than me has intervened. Just before, and I've heard other members talk about that. And a real fast story, so I don't sound so self-centered. I had this sponsor. He was in the middle. He was a roadie. He used to sell ShamWows and all that stuff. He was like 15 years sober, really good sobriety. Things were happening. He was in Texas or somewhere, and he was having a lot of problems at home, and his spiritual condition was starting to slide a bit. And then he decided he thought he was going to go have a drink. He walked down the stairs of this bar, and he walked up to the bar. He says, "I'd like a double scotch." He says, "This is going to taste great. It's been a long..." He's saying this out loud. Only alcoholics talk to themselves like this. I'm going to convince myself of something I shouldn't do. This is going to taste great. Yes, it is. All right. As you burn shit to the ground. Okay, so he orders it. The guy beside him on the bar says, "Maybe you want to hold off on that." He says, "Why don't you mind your own business?" He says, "I'm a long-standing member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe you'd like to talk." Well, I wouldn't go test that. Okay, God, let's see if you're working. Let's see if you're working. I'm ordering a double. I don't think it works that way, right? Anyhow. So then they get into, the first time they ask you, first time they make clear to diagnose yourself is we agnostics, page 44. Very simple on the questions of alcoholism. Right, they give you the second symptom first. Is they talk about here, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. I do this in the study all the time. I said, what are the preceding chapters for? Define yourself? No. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. This is to teach you about alcoholism. So it should be clear now. What should be clear? Oh, well, let's see. We hope we have made clear now the distinction between the alcoholic and a non-alcoholic. Have they done that? Yes. I fully understand what an alcoholic is from their point of view. I understand alcoholism from their point of view, based on the doctor's finding where he worked. I understand what they're talking about now, right? Do I have an opinion on that? No. I understand what they're talking about. I have the collective thinking, right? The same thinking. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. What symptom is that? That's the insanity. Not the obsession, the insanity. Something I can't see happening. Why we like the obsession is I could see it happening. I could do something about the obsession. I can't do something about the insanity. And more about alcoholism, they say this obsession must be smashed. Who does the smashing? We do the smashing based on truth. Right? There's a lot of times I've been tempted to have a drink. Oh, it'd be nice to have a drink. And the other part, no, you can't have one because you're allergic to it. Clarity, have clarity on that in early sobriety. Before I'd gone through the work, man, I really want to drink. No, you're going to a meeting. I'd overcome those desires or those urges. But I've never been able to overcome the insanity. When I look back, those moments where there was no defense whatsoever against that first drink, nothing could have stopped me from taking that drink. There's a big difference between the obsession and the insanity. Why I like the obsession? I could do something about it. The insanity, I can't do nothing about. Anyways, moving on. If when you find an honestly on, you can't quit entirely, or when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. So then they get in the physical part. And then on the next page they talk about what our problem is. Lack of dilemma. But before that they talked about the obsessive alcoholic, right? Because they talked about if a mere code of morals, better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcohol, many of us would have recovered long ago. All those sayings, all those things that give us comfort, you know, those things we tell each other, I call it soother sobriety. It makes you feel good, but it doesn't really do nothing for you. Right? It's like sitting in the airport talking about where everybody else is going. It makes you feel good, but you're not going anywhere. But what's the luggage for? In case something happens. There's only one thing that just happens in AA. I'm going to tell you the secret. How many people would like to know what the secret is? If you're alcoholic in AA, there's one thing I guarantee you will just happen. That's another drink. Oh, made friends. Okay. So they say lack of power. That was our dilemma, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? That's exactly what this book is about. Right? Its main object is to enable you to find a power which will help you solve your problem. That's the way we hear it. It doesn't say that actually. You'll be reading. Are you sure it doesn't say that? Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. Which will solve your problem and help you solve your problem. Is it the same statement?
No.
That's the way we hear it. We hear it, oh, I need to be involved in this solution and fixing me. Because what's our first obsession? Me. I like talking about me. Enough about me. What do you think of me? Let me tell you how I've found a solution to me. All right? Anyhow, moving on. So it gives me the idea that really I need to find this power that will create a change in me sufficient enough and allow me to recover from alcohol. How do I know this? Because of the examples that went before me and those that put this text together. So one of the things that they talk about, the book is really wild, but page 52 is one of the things I still hold true in my sobriety today. They talked about something that's really interesting, that most alcoholics or people in recovery don't have 2 points of view. They only have their point of view. And they're looking for somebody to agree with it. Right? You ever hear people like what's happening now? Some people are arguing with my point of view. What are you talking about? It kind of creates like steel on steel in our brain when we hear something different than what we're used to hearing. Right? Because we got our own point of view. I want you to confirm my point of view. That set aside prayer, that's for other people. I'll agree with you until you say something I don't agree with. Then we can leave that prayer alone and we can start arguing. Anybody? So here, one of the things that really helped me, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problem the same readiness to change our point of view. We're having trouble with personal relationships, and it kind of goes on to the unmanageability, the inability to manage my own thinking and feelings. The unmanageability, I'm the unmanageability sober. The unmanageability drinking is a totally different animal. But my problem is sober. Nobody has that problem here? My problems start, the more sober I get, the more untreated I am. I get more crazy as time goes on, untreated, than I do. Anybody get more crazy here sober? But we could contain it a lot better, right? We get that sobriety. 5 minutes before the meeting, we're weaving a rope. We're going to kill somebody. Get to a meeting as, hi. Just let it go. Surrender. Acceptance. Turn it over. Wait, you misunderstood me. No, I understood. Your house is on fire. Just let it go. No, it's not my house. It's yours. What? When it's our house, it's a totally different story. Your house, just acceptance. Is there anybody else here I could talk to? Anyways, so changing our point of view. And then they got, what's really interesting here on page 54, they talked about here, which I kind of really missed for a lot of years until I really started getting into this. They talked about the things that create our lives. What I'm made of. All the things that have me standing here today is the same thing that got me into Alcoholics Anonymous, the same thing that got me pursuing alcoholism and drug addiction and the life I did, was my thinking at a subconscious level. They talked about, did not these feelings after all determine the course of our existence? So subconsciously, there's a whole bunch of things going on in my life that I was never really aware of all the time. I'd get a little picture of it every now and then. Something would say, there's a different way of life. You really shouldn't have done that. You don't have to live like this. And I'd push those feelings and those things down. You hear people say, I never felt nothing before I came here. Then you wouldn't be here. Something within inside of you got your attention enough that you took action on it. Something inside of you said, you know what, there's something different for me than the life I'm living. That feeling of hope, right? That something inside was talking to you that was louder than the voices in your own head that gave you pause to say, yeah, maybe. That hope, that kind of shifting focus or energy within ourselves sufficient enough that we took action on. That was our first meeting. Right? Unless you're court appointed, and then they'll come later. Anyways, moving on. So then they tell us where the solution is in 52. I'm sorry, on 55. They're talking for the first time, they're saying on 54, they're saying there's this guiding thing that's always guided me, but I've been unaware of it, and I'm some result of all these things. And then on 55, they're saying, hey, this power has always resided in you, but you haven't acknowledged it at all times. You've had glimpses of it, but you've never really acknowledged it. This is the power that we talk about as we understood him. Right? This is what we're talking about, is this life force within inside of yourself that you've always experienced. So what we do is an exercise, we go back over our lives and kind of say, where have I experienced this voice or this feeling or this sensation of something wanting something different from me that comes from deep down within? Okay, yeah, it's kind of been, so this is the starting point. We know where we want to go, but this is the starting point. This is where you're going to focus on when life starts becoming too much. So as we go through this thing, then it gets us to making a decision. Right? And they talk about, we thought, well, making sure we could abandon ourselves to this course of action. We understand, we're not surrendering to it. We're making a conscious decision to align ourselves with this power that will save me from me. I see the benefit of aligning myself with this power. It's not a punishing power. I worked through all that through We Agnostics. It's a power that an ally that's going to save me from the fate that awaits me. Right? It's kind of like the Second World War. the United States didn't want to get involved. Germany, being addiction, was having its way running havoc all over it. Then all of a sudden it started interfering with, they got bombed. And they realized in order to combat this force, they couldn't do it on their own. But they seen the size of the force, and they said there's no way we'd be able to beat this thing on our own. The only way we could beat it is join alliances with our allies. And if I join alliances with the allies, then I could overcome this thing, which would be addiction or alcoholism. It's kind of like the same principle. I thought, wow, that's way better. It's like the difference between marrying somebody because you want to and marrying somebody because you have to. A lot of people get into this because they have to. They're doing time in AA. There's a lot of people doing time in AA. They're not living what this thing is about. They talk about the promises. Yeah, oh yeah, the promises are coming true. You should tell your face. like when they talk about being amazed, like there's a lot of difference between being amazed and somewhat thrilled. Somewhat thrilled is your experience. Your first sexual experience is somewhat thrilled. Amazed is involving somebody else. Most people are still talking about their first experience. We're talking about a better experience that you need to involve somebody else to get it. And this point is power greater than ourselves in order to accomplish that. So steps 1, 2, and 3 is like dating. It could change at any time, and you're the only one that don't know when that's going to happen. Right? Steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 is the engagements, a little more serious. Right? 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 is the marriage. It's a way of life. So they get into this, I make a decision. Step 4 is about starting my own experience about what you people were talking about this power. It's the start of my experience with this power of making it real, of the ability to overcome the difficulties and the bondages of self and to rewrite my story. So I become comfortable enough and free from those things. So as I went through the resentments and started applying the 3rd step prayer and then the resentment prayer, and I started looking at things differently. When I got into bondage, I applied these prayers. I said, wow, something seemed to start working here beyond my comprehension. And I started getting freedom from these things I used to have attachment to. So all of a sudden, the movie that I was in became secondary. I was able to step back from it without the attachment. And I was able to look at it a lot more clearly, 90% of it, without all that emotional attachment to it. I was able to separate myself from it for the first time to be an observer instead of a participant. Before the steps, I was always a participant in my thinking. I was held hostage to it. I couldn't determine how I thought, felt, or reacted. I was always consumed with my emotional drive within inside of myself. So here, for the first time, I started getting freedom from that. So I went through the resentments, went through the fears, and I found out for the first time in the fears what God's will was for me. And I started that relationship. God's will for me is to live in the here and now and be free from all the stuff that was driving me and to play the role He assigns. So that's kind of giving you the impression that you've already started this relationship. That enough of you is out of the way, that you have clarity to where this thing's residing, this power, that you're able to go past the coho section of your mind and start experiencing this thing. 71 talks about, I hope you're convinced now that God can do whatever that you are unable to do for yourself. And that's create a shift within my thinking and emotions sufficient enough for me to be comfortable within my own skin and have purpose for my life. That's pretty amazing stuff, and I'm only at page 71. I can see why people wouldn't want to do this. You're going to feel better? No, not for me. That's what I tell people. Be careful. If you do this, it'll change everything about your life. Oh, thanks for the warning. Let's avoid that. Okay. No, anyways, you get the joke on the way home. Okay. Page 72 reconfirms what this is all about. It's not about getting to know me. There's a song, Getting to Know Me. No, that's a... Is that, or Getting to Know You? I didn't like that song. I thought it was Getting to Know Me, right? Okay, so here reconfirms what this is all about, right? It is to have a new relationship with this power, right? And then it gives me the elements of that. And I'm going to kind of go through this stuff. And I'm going to give you some mind-twisting stuff now, right? How much longer do I got? 10 minutes? Anybody still here?
Keep going.
Okay, how many people are still here? 2. Okay. So then I was saying, need to cut that squirrel everywhere and go home, and I got to put out the garbage and take that. I did my meeting. Okay, moving on. So it reconfirms here, which is really interesting what this is all about on page 75. By the time I finished their recipe for me, right? One of the really amazing things that happens that a lot of people miss, because there's two routes in the fourth step. One is on the route to a spiritual experience, and the other route is self-correcting. So you hear a lot of people talk about self-correcting, right? They go on to the behavioral management form, and you hear about them working on them all. Then the other route is the spiritual experience. There's two roots in this, because remember, our first obsession is ourselves, and our mind's designed to outwit us. Our mind's design is to be kept in charge, is to not give up the throne, right? The mind's design is to convince you that you're on the right track based on what makes sense to you. And the best way, my sponsor said that is, if you really want to know if you've done this, you could show somebody else how to do it out of the book. If you can't show somebody else out of the book how to do it, then you haven't done it. So you could say you've done it, but we all know you haven't done it. What makes you say that? Just by the way you share. You're the only one deceived in thinking you have something by doing nothing. And what's going to take your attention is something within inside of yourself saying, you know what, yeah, I haven't done this because I can't show someone else how to do this. Or two, a relapse. One or the other. Because remember, our biggest problem is ourselves and our self-deception. We deceive ourselves into believe something is true when it's not. I know, and the only problem with something not being true is reality. Oh, there's that thing again. Okay, so one of the things they talk about here at page 75 is, for we are building an arch which we shall walk a free man. This archway is within inside of ourselves. It's stepping into the spiritual realm. So we have two realities. There's my reality as a human being, which I spend most of my time in logic and emotion and drive and the energy that gets stuck in my thinking. When I could sit there and think about, and I can feel all the emotion and anxiety that goes with it. And I stay stuck in there. And what I need to do is create a diversion to get me out of that niche. But what I do is just prolong the inevitable, because I'm back to that place of trying to get away from. Right? So I continuously end up in that thought or emotion or idea that I'm trying to escape. And I'm in conflict with people, places, and things, mostly myself most of the time, because I haven't found an escape route within inside of me to create change. So they talk about here, through the fourth step, is what I learned to become as an observer. And when these things present themselves, later on they'll really talk about it, and mostly in 11, but in 10 is I become an observer of these things starting to present themselves. I'm able to apply prayer to move in a new direction. So I take that energy that was spent over here, that I used to permit these feelings and ideas of happening, and now what I do is I apply these principles to move in a new direction. And I start to outgrow these fears. I start to master resentments. I start to create the relationships that I always desired by applying these new things. So that means I have my view, but I have a new view. Right? And so when I get these views of life presenting itself and I show up, there's the pause. So I come in here with two instincts, fight or flight. What I'm learning is the pause instinct, the ability to assess, like the serenity prayer, the ability to assess situations and redirect energy along new spiritual lines. So the second half of how it works talks about the principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. So the fourth step shows me what I used to be like, or what I am like, based on non-spiritual way of living. That's who I am. The fourth step is not who I used to be. The fourth step is who I am on a non-spiritual basis. So now I'm on a new direction. I have this new freedom, new understanding. I have this sixth sense developing inside of me. I have this consciousness that I'm able to tap into, that voice that always wanted better for me. I have it now. So this is where I'm going to make a lot of friends. 6 and 7. We're going to look at this in a whole new way. Because remember, our obsession, remember, neck and neck, the self wants to take over, says, this is where I step in and help out. This is where it becomes about me again. Oh, finally, I get to do something here. Right? And all the steps are, no, it's not about you. That's first step phase, is recovery, is about you. Second phase, recovery, is about your relationship with something greater than you. Most people in the fellowship are still in first phase recovery. They're still stuck in themselves. And the only way to overcome self is that relationship with something greater than you. your focus point becomes something other than you, which is a problem for us. In step 11, that's why a lot of people don't like it. They talk about at the end of the day, what were you mostly focused on, you or other things? Oh, let's not do 11 no more. Let's do 10. I like 10. It talks about focusing on me. I like focusing on me. When I think there's a problem, then I'll bring God into it. When you find out there's a problem, it's usually too late. Usually involves 911. Anyways, burnt that shit to the ground. Okay, so they talk about here on page, this is interesting, and it kind of talks about here on page 75. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we asked ourselves if we admitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we will walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skipped on the cement put into our foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God, to let who? God, remove from us all these things which we admitted are objectionable. What things would I be carrying in 6 and 7 or page which are objectionable? What am I carrying that are objectionable? The resentments, the fears, the harms? Kind of interesting, right? Because these are things that cause me all my problems, right? Which is associated self-dishonesty, but we see that's associated with my spiritual condition. So what would I be carrying here? Well, when I look back, what did I carry was my resentment. Some resentment still, some fear, some harms, some conduct. Right? These are objectionable, right? And I'm still carrying them. Right? Can he now take every one? If we still cling something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Well, what would I still be hanging on to? Well, when I did my 6 and 7, what I was still hanging on to was some of the things that I was able to make money from because I wasn't working. I knew they were dishonest, right? But I wasn't willing to let go of these things that I was doing. So I knew it, so I kind of acknowledged what they were. I said, okay, God, yeah, I'm willing that you should have these things if you give me something better. So he did. He gave me a job. Anyways. Okay, so everyone. We ask God to help us be willing. So I understand what these things, everyone, if we still cling to something, we'll not let go. And that could be resentment, harms, or whatever. It's these things that I still have attachment to. My story's still stuck to. There's stuff from my fourth that I carried forward. Anybody here? Some harms, some resentments, some fears. I still hung on to them. But I was able to acknowledge what they were, and I was able to bring them to God. Because a lot of it, I always thought it was a selfish dishonesty and consideration. No, that's based on my spiritual condition associated with my instincts. I seen what the past was. We'll see real fast here. When ready, we said something like this: my Creator, I'm not willing you should have all of me, good and bad. Why not just the bad? You hear people talk about 6 and 7, they just talk about the bad. They're saying here, good and bad, because it's the same coin. When you talk about how great you are, you're focusing on who? You. When you talk about how bad you are, you're focusing on who? You. It's all about you, right? So then they talk about here, I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go from here to do your bidding. We have then completed step 7. What does completed mean? What does completed mean? Finished. So we see 6 and 7 is associated with my past. I get to see what I'm still trying to carry forward. I'm on a different routing. At the bottom of that page, you can read it later, it talks about that I've accumulated these things by my effort to live on self-will. That's how I used to be. Now I'm on a different footing. I'm on a spiritual path now, right? Path of focusing on something greater than myself. I'm just going to finish with 10 and 11. This is where I make more friends. So 84, on that thought of, so we see that 6 and 7 reconfirm step 3. Step 3 is God is going to do for me what I can't do for myself, create this change. 6 and 7 reconfirms that. It's not about working on me. Because if I'm focusing on me, I'm focusing on my past. If I'm still the same person I was in 6 and 7, then the change hasn't happened that they talk about. I'm not under a different footing. So step 10 talks about, real fast, talks about, this thought brings us to step 10. And then it talks about, as we go through here, our next function. What does next function mean? Our next function is growing understanding and effectiveness of what? Of that new spiritual experience, that connection that we have. And they talk about by this time the change should have happened. The if factors, if you kind of go to page 85, they talk about here at the bottom, much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from Him who has all knowledge and power. If we've carefully followed directions, right, up to this point, we've begun to sense His flow into our spirit. To some extent, we've become God conscious. We've begun to develop this vital sixth sense, which is the whole purpose of this whole process comes to this paragraph, right? The whole point of this is the kind of second phase recovery part, right? They talk about we've begun to develop this vital sixth sense, but we must go further. That means more action. What is must? We must go further. It means I got to go where if I stay here, I'm in trouble, right? Resting on my laurels mean I don't see the need to go any further. I'm happy with the accomplishments of whatever. So if you got to go to page 88, and they talk about here, this is kind of food for thought again. They talk about we alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in a simple way we have just outlined. What is the way they just outlined? What step was that? They just do something or have been doing something is the same meaning? Two different meanings. Just outline means I just talked about it, right? I have been talking about is a long tense, right? It would have said that we have been talking about. They said we just talked about. So which would be step 11. So here's the exercise, and I'm going to close with this, and you guys can do this on your own. You take a piece of paper like this, on your own, at home. Fold it in half. So it opens like this. So on this half, when you fold it open, so on this half here, you write down how they do step 11. So you start page 85, you go 85, 86, 87, point form, how they do step 11. Because that's the way they just outlined, right? That's the whole step 11 is the development step, right? Continue to take personal inventory. And they talk about developing our conscious contact, right? Seeking only knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. What step is that? 11. It's the development step, right? So I write down how they do step 11. Then tonight, or whenever you do the exercise, so tonight being what? Today's Tuesday. Put Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, abbreviation across the top. And then for 1 week you go, did I do this? Yes or no? Put a Y or an N. Right? And then after a week, you take this piece of paper and you put it aside. Don't look at it. And then you go back to page 85 and you read it again. And if you miss what the abbreviation is or the short form to the saying, you go back and read what they meant by it. You do that for 3 weeks and watch your sobriety take off in means that you wouldn't even dream of. Right? I love this book. It's pretty phenomenal. I could spend like weeks on it, right? I tried to do a crash course, give you guys something to argue about while you're sitting there, something to disturb you about. But step 11 is the magic. It is really the magic. It's where the impossible becomes possible. Where you're able to create a life beyond anything you could ever imagine. This is where God says, I have so much more for you than you're ready to receive. Right? I have a life for you beyond anything you could ever imagine. And kind of in closing, it's really funny. When I came in here when I went to Vancouver in 85, I had some serious charges. I was looking at pen time and all that other stuff. I went through this process, and God showed up everywhere in my life. I got to really see how God worked through doing this process in 11 in my 9. So in order to do my 9s, I had to go do steps 10 and 11, mostly 11 and working with other people, right? And that kind of took care of that stuff. Well, it was really interesting. I went to Cuba, and I was talking to my friends about this. We smuggled in 22 big books into Cuba. At 28 years sober, you would have told me I'd be smuggling books into a communist country so AA members can enjoy a meeting. What we have here is pretty remarkable. They share a cup of coffee. One guy brings one coffee in, and everybody in the meeting gets about that much coffee. It costs them, those members over there, cost them half a month's salary to get a big book. Half a month's salary to get a big book. We got them sitting on the coffee tables and we're still not reading them. They're over there. Imagine what those 22 books are going to do in their hand. Imagine the families, the friends, and the people, the influences, and these people in their community with this kid. This thing is magical. If you haven't found the magic in this, find someone to take you through this, and it will rock your world. I've been traveling all over the world. The life I have is phenomenal. Phenomenal. It's all due to this recipe. From my wife, to my kids, to my travel, to my peace of mind, to the life I live, it's all out of here. This is Da Vinci's Code to the fourth dimension, the spiritual realm. And it could change things beyond anything you could ever imagine. There's only one limitation to this whole thing, and that's me. When I get out of this, just enough I can watch God show up in ways that blow your mind. Just think, if this thing could create a psychic change in your psyche, in your thinking process, sufficient enough for you to recover from an illness that was killing you, and that's an internal shift, just imagine what could happen on the world around you. Right? You may be the difference between somebody living and dying. This is Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the fellowship. I hope you're not just sitting in the airport doing time. I really do, because you're missing the whole thing. I hope you get to a place where you're amazed, where you talk about this thing, you get more excited, where the only person kind of pissed off is the new person. Oh, it's him again. I hope everybody has that feeling of, oh, we should have more people where you walk in the room and go, oh, right? There's not enough of us, man. Thanks for allowing me to be here. I love you guys, and you guys are great.